The sun was bright over the small suburban neighborhood, casting golden light on the white ribbons tied to the mailbox and the simple arch in the backyard. Laughter floated through the air, mixed with the clinking of glasses and the joyful chatter of friends and family. For Jasmine, it was the happiest day of her life. She stood in her flowing white dress, her brown skin glowing with excitement, holding the hand of Daniel, the man she had fallen in love with despite all odds. Daniel, with his sandy hair and nervous grin, couldn't take his eyes off her. "Are you ready for forever?" Kay whispered. Jasmine squeezed his hand more than ever. Guests clapped as the couple exchanged vows under the arch. The officiant's words carried by the breeze. Tears rolled down cheeks, cameras clicked, and the sound of joy filled the yard. But not everyone shared their happiness. Across the street, behind a half-drawn curtain, Mr. Thompson watched with narrowed eyes. He was in his 60s, a man who had lived in the neighborhood all his life, and who carried his prejudices as tightly as his Bible. To him, the sight of a black bride and a white groom was not a celebration, but a provocation. His jaw tightened as the laughter grew louder. His fingers curled around the phone on his kitchen counter. "They don't belong here," he muttered under his breath. "Not in my neighborhood, not mixing like that." And with a firm press of his thumb, he dialed 911. Inside the yard, Jasmine leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder as they prepared for their first dance. She had no idea that dark clouds were already forming over their perfect day, clouds born not of weather, but of hate. The line rang only once before the dispatcher answered. 911. "What's your emergency?" Mr. Thompson's voice was calm, too calm, as if he had been rehearsing these words. "There's a disturbance at the house across the street," he said. "Loud music, too many people. Looks like trouble. You better send someone before it gets out of hand." The dispatcher typed quickly, following protocol. "Sir, can you describe the situation more clearly? Is anyone in danger?" Thompson's lips curled. He lowered his voice, injecting fear into every syllable. "There are strangers in the neighborhood. Loud, aggressive. I don't feel safe." In truth, the only danger was the sound of celebration. A cousin's laughter, a little girl chasing bubbles across the lawn, Jasmine's aunt adjusting the flowers on the arch. But Thompson didn't see joy. He saw difference, he saw skin color, and in his mind, that was enough. After the call, he set the phone down and stood by the window, heart pounding with a sick sort of satisfaction. Soon the police would arrive. Soon this disruption would be shut down. "Order must be kept," Kay whispered. Meanwhile, the backyard glowed with happiness. Jasmine's mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, watching her daughter sway gently in Daniel's arms. "Look at them," she murmured. "That girl's been through so much, and now she finally has her joy." Daniel's father chuckled, raising his glass. "Never thought my son would be smart enough to win her heart. Guess miracles happen after all." For Jasmine, each second felt like a dream. The music, the warmth of Daniel's hand, the feeling of finally belonging somewhere after years of being doubted, judged, and whispered about. Today, none of it mattered. She was loved. Then, faintly at first, came the sound. A siren. Low, distant, but unmistakable. Daniel noticed it too. He frowned, looking toward the street. Strange. I don't remember anyone else on the guest list. Jasmine laughed nervously, brushing it off. Maybe it's just passing through. But the sirens grew louder, closer, until the flashing red and blue lights washed over the white wedding arch, staining the celebration with unease. The music faltered, guests exchanged worried glances, mothers pulled children closer, and Jasmine's heart sank, a knot forming in her chest. Because deep down, she already knew. This was not a coincidence. This was hate knocking at the door of her happiness. The flashing lights painted the quiet suburban street in strokes of red and blue. The wedding music faded completely as the police cruisers pulled up in front of the house. Tires crunched against the pavement, radios crackled, and doors swung open. 3 officers stepped out. Their uniforms looked sharper than the smiles they treated and failed to put on. One of them, Officer Bradley, adjusted his belt with a deliberate tug, scanning the yard with the cold eyes of someone searching for trouble rather than peace. Jasmine's fingers dug into Daniel's arm, her breath caught in her throat. "Why are they here?" she whispered. "We didn't do anything wrong." Daniel squeezed her hand, though his own heart was racing. "I'll talk to them, don't worry." But he was worried. He knew the history. He had seen it in the news, in his own town, and sometimes uncomfortably within his own family. He knew that to some people, love like theirs was not a celebration, but a scandal. The crowd grew silent as the officers approached. A child whimpered. Jasmine's uncle, a tall man with broad shoulders, instinctively stepped closer to the newlyweds, protective. "Afternoon," Officer Bradley said, his tone clipped. "We've had reports of a disturbance, loud gathering, possible threats." "Threats?" Jasmine's mother stepped forward, her voice shaking with disbelief. "This is a wedding." The other officers, a younger man named Collins, glanced at the decorations, the arch, the nervous smiles. For a moment, his stern expression cracked. He saw no threat, only joy, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sir, we're celebrating our wedding. We have a permit for the gathering, and the music isn't even that loud." Bradley's lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes flicked to Jasmine, lingering too long, heavy with unspoken judgment. "Whose idea was this party?" he asked. "Our idea," Daniel replied firmly. "Mine and my wife's." That word wife made Jasmine's chest swell with pride, but the way Bradley's gaze hardened sent a chill through her. He wasn't here for noise complaints. He was here because someone wanted their happiness broken. And then, as if on cue, Mr. Thompson stepped out from his porch across the street, arms folded, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He called out, "Told you, officers. Too many people. Didn't feel safe in my own home. You need to shut this down before something happens." The wedding guests turned to look at him, anger flashing in their eyes. Jasmine's and muttered, "Coward." But Jasmine, she just felt hollow. She had seen this man before. He had watched her every time she walked down the street. His stare had always carried something sharp, something poisonous. And now, she realized, this was the moment he'd been waiting for. The tension in the air thickened. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others pulled out phones, quietly recording, sensing what could come. Jasmine swallowed hard, her pulse thundering in her ears. Her perfect bath, one she had dreamed of since childhood, was slipping away under the weight of sirens, suspicion, and hate. And for the first time since the morning began, She felt fear replacing joy. The backyard, once alive with laughter, was now frowning in silence. Only the faint buzz of cicadas filled the pauses between Officer Bradley's clipped words and the distant murmur of worried guests. The wedding arch still stood tall, but its white ribbons fluttered in the breeze, like fragile reminders of a joy that was slipping away. Bradley stepped closer, his boots heavy against the grass. "I'm going to need to see identification. Bride and groom first." Jasmine blinked, confused. "Identification? This is our wedding, not a crime scene." "Ma'am," Bradley said sharply, "you'll do as instructed." Daniel pulled his wallet from his suit jacket, hands trembling but steady enough to pass over his head. Bradley glanced at it, then shifted his attention back to Jasmine. "Well," he pressed. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel dozens of eyes on her: family, friends, strangers in uniform. Every movement felt like it carried the weight of judgment. Slowly, she reached into the small clutch at her side and handed him her driver's license. Bradley studied it longer than necessary, his eyes narrowing. "Jasmine Carter," he said aloud, his tone almost mocking. "And this is your husband?" "Yes," Jasmine replied, her voice steady though her knees felt weak. "That's my husband." Bradley's gaze swept between them, lingering on their joined hands. The pause stretched too long, and with every second, Jasmine felt the ugliness beneath his silence. From the crowd, Jasmine's uncle took a step forward. "Officer, with all due respect, what exactly is the issue here? You're disrupting a legal, private ceremony. We have the right to gather." Bradley's jaw tightened. "Sir, stand back, don't interface." The tension thickened like smoke. The guests shifted uneasily, their voices rising in whispers. Some phones were raised higher now, cameras catching every word, every glance. "Mr. Thompson smirked from across the street, his arms folded like a man watching a show he purchased tickets for. "Say," he called out, "told you they were trouble. Look at all this chaos." Jasmine's fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to demand justice, but fear weighed down her throat. She thought of all the stories she had read, all the names turned into hashtags, all the weddings, birthdays, and everyday moments shattered by prejudice disguised as law. And now it was her day. Daniel stepped forward, voice rising with anger. "This is harassment. We've done nothing wrong. If you're here because of him," he pointed toward Thompson, "then you're not protecting peace. You're enforcing hate." Bradley's hand hovered near his holster, his tone dropped low. "Tarp, careful. So, don't make this harder than it has to be." Gasps spread through the crowd. Children clung tighter to their parents. Jasmine's chest tightened until it felt like she couldn't breathe. And in that moment, under the bright summer sky, with wedding flowers at her feet and the man she loved at her side, Jasmine realized something chilling. Their love wasn't just under scrutiny. It was under threat. The air grew heavy, pressing down on everyone in the backyard like an invisible weight. The wedding guests stood in uneasy clusters, whispering to one another, their eyes darting between the officers and the bride and groom. The children, sensing the tension but not fully understanding, clung to their parents' legs. A little boy asked in a small voice, "Mom, are they gonna take Auntie Jasmine away?" The mother hushed him quickly, her own eyes brimming with fear. Jasmine's pulse hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. She fought to keep her voice calm, but inside, a storm was rising. This is supposed to be my wedding day, she thought. Why does love have to feel like a crime? She looked at Daniel, his jaw clenched, his hand holding hers so tightly that it almost hurt. His eyes told her everything he was scared to, but he would not let go. Not now, not ever. Officer Bradley's hand still lingered near his holster, as if he was daring Daniel to make one wrong move. You people need to calm down, Bradley barked. His voice sliced through the murmurs of the crowd. We received a complaint. Until we determine the situation is safe, this gathering is under review. Under review. Jasmine's uncle stepped forward again, his broad shoulders tense. This is a wedding. There's no crime here. You're escalating something that doesn't exist. The younger officers, Collins, finally spoke, his voice softer. Bradley, maybe we should. But Bradley cut him off with a glare. I'll handle this. He turned back to Daniel and Jasmine, his eyes cold. If you don't want this to get ugly, you'll cooperate. Now tell your guests to leave. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jasmine's mother clutched her chest, outrage flashing in her eyes. Leave. You can't shut down my daughter's wedding, she cried. Bradley's voice grew sharper. Ma'am, I won't ask again. Disperse the gathering immediately. Silence followed, a tense, suffocating silence. Then Daniel spoke, his voice shaking with controlled fury. No, we will not end this wedding because of one bitter man's prejudice. We're not criminals. We're not a threat. And you, he pointed at Thompson across the street. You don't get to ruin our happiness. Bradley's face darkened, his pride bruised by defiance. His hand moved even closer to his holster. Several guests cried out in protest, voices overlapping in fear. Don't you dare, she's just a bride. For God's sake, someone record this. Phones were raised higher now, cameras focused, live streams starting. The world outside this yard was about to see. Jasmine's breathing quickened. She felt her body trembling, but inside her chest, something stronger than fear began to spark. She thought of all the generations before her who had stood in the face of hate. She thought of the vows she had just spoken to Daniel. And in that moment, she made a quiet promise to herself. They will not take this day from me. But as she lifted her head, defiance burning in her eyes, Bradley's voice cut through the yard like a blade. Fine, if you won't comply. He reached for his radio. Dispatch, we're calling for backup. The wedding guests gasped. Backup. More officers. More sirens. The day was unraveling fast, and Jasmine realized this was only the beginning. The quiet neighborhood erupted again with the echo of sirens. What had once been the happiest sound of wedding song, voices singing, glasses clinking, was now drowned in the wail of police cars rushing toward the celebration. Guests turned their heads toward the street, dread painted on their faces. Mothers held their children closer. Fathers stood taller, shielding their families with their bodies. The white ribbons tied to the trees fluttered helplessly in the wind, like torn fragments of peace. Daniel tightened his grip on Jasmine's hand. He could feel her trembling, though her face remained strong. Her eyes stayed fixed on the street, waiting for what she already knew was coming. I'm so sorry, Daniel whispered. This isn't how today was supposed to be. Jasmine turned to him, her voice low but firm. Don't apologize. They want us broken. We can't give them that. The rumble of engines grew louder, and within moments, 3 more cruisers screeched to a stop in front of the house. Doors slammed. Officers stepped out. 5, 6, 7 of them forming a wall of authority that towered over the modest backyard celebration. Bradley straightened his posture, pride swelling in his chest as reinforcements arrived. He had the power now, and he wanted everyone to know it. "Say it, mister," Thompson shouted smugly from across the street, waving his hands in exaggerated alarm. "This is what I was talking about. Out of control, dangerous." His words stung, not because they were true, but because they were designed to be believed. The officers began moving toward the yard. Radios crackled with static. Their boots thudded against the pavement, heavy and final, like hammers driving nails into a coffin. Guests shuffled nervously, their whisper sharp and urgent. "They can't do this. Keep recording. Stay calm. Don't give them a reason." One of the newly arrived officers, a woman with kind eyes beneath her stern exterior, approached Bradley. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" she asked, scanning the yard full of wedding decorations and startled faces. Bradley answered without hesitation. "Noise complaint. Possible unruly crowd. Situation escalating." The woman frowned. "This looks like a wedding." "Don't let the decorations fool you," Bradley snapped. "They've been hostile since we arrived." Jasmine's chest burned. She wanted to scream, "He's lying," but she knew her words might only feed the fire. Instead, she stood tall, letting her silence carry its own weight. Daniel raised his voice. "This is harassment. This is racial profiling. And you know it. Look around you. Does this look like a riot to you? It's a family celebrating love." A ripple of agreement spread through the guests. "That's right," someone shouted. "This is our community too." Phones captured everything. Bride, still in her white dress, surrounded by police. The groom, his face red with fury. The crowd, tense but resilient. Bradley sneered. "Enough. This event is over. Everyone, disperse, or we'll start making arrests." Gasps broke through the crowd. Jasmine's mother stepped forward, tears shining in her eyes. "You can't do this. This is my daughter's wedding day. Please, please, don't take this from her." For a brief moment, the female officer's face softened, but Bradley's command snapped like a whip. "Clear the yard." The line of officers began advancing. Step by step, they pushed closer, their shadows stretching across the grass. Children whimpered, chairs tipped over as people moved back. The joy that had once filled the air was now replaced with panic. Daniel stood his ground, pulling Jasmine behind him protectively. "We're not leaving. Arrest me if you have to, but this is our wedding, and you're not shutting it down." Bradley's eyes lit up, as if he had been waiting for this exact defiance. "Fire," he growled, reaching for his cuffs. The crowd erupted. Doubts, pleas, cries for reason filled the air. Jasmine's end screamed, "No, don't you touch him." Phone zoomed in closer, every angle capturing the moment. And Jasmine, her heart racing, her wedding dress trembling against her legs in the summer breeze, stepped forward. She placed herself between Bradley and Daniel, her voice clear, unshaken. "If you're going to arrest him," she said, her eyes burning into Bradley's, "then you'll have to go through me." The yard went still, even the cicadas seemed to hush. For the first time that day, Bradley hesitated. And Jasmine realized her fight had only just begun. The yard held its breath. Jasmine stood tall in her white dress, her veil trembling in the breeze. The late afternoon sun reflected in her eyes, sharp and unyielding, as she faced Officer Bradley. "Through me," she repeated, her voice steady, echoing across the stunned crowd. Bradley's jaw clenched, his hand still hovering near his cuffs. He hadn't expected this. He was used to compliance, to fear. But this woman Fitzbride wasn't trembling. She wasn't begging. She was daring him. "You're obstructing justice," he said coldly. "Step aside." "This isn't justice," Jasmine shot back. "This is hate dressed in a uniform." Gasps rippled through the guests. Phones trembled in hands as they captured every word. Daniel's heart pounded. He wanted to pull her back, to protect her, but he also knew deep down that this was Jasmine's moment. Her strength wasn't just for her, it was for every single person in the yard who had been made to feel small, less than, unworthy. "Baby," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I'm right behind you." Jasmine didn't turn her head, but she squeezed his hand, letting him know she heard. "Mr. Thompson smirked from his porch, shouting louder now. "Say, they're dangerous. They're threatening the police. Arrest them all before someone gets hurt." But this time, the guests didn't stay silent. Jasmine's uncle roared back. "The only threat here is you." Others shouted in agreement, voices uniting, growing stronger. "Leave them alone. This is love, not crime. We're not moving." The officers shifted uneasily. Even those who had come with Bradley began to hesitate. The young officers, Collins, stepped forward, his voice wavering but sincere. "Bradley, this doesn't feel right. We came for a noise complaint, not to shut down a wedding." Bradley snapped his head toward him, eyes blazing. "Stay in line, Collins. Don't forget who gives the orders." But Collins didn't move back. He looked at Jasmine, at Daniel, at the families trembling in fear but refusing to break. He saw children clinging to their parents, mothers with tears streaking their cheeks. He saw not criminals, but a celebration turned into a nightmare. The female officers with kind eyes stepped closer too, lowering her voice. "Bradley, maybe we should de-escalate. There are cameras everywhere. This is going to end up on the news." Her words made Bradley's face darken further, like a storm brewing behind his eyes. He hated losing control. He hated being questioned. "Do your job," he growled. "And tame chaos." Bradley lunged forward, trying to push past Jasmine to reach Daniel. Instantly, the crowd erupted in screams. Jasmine braced herself, planting her feet firmly into the grass. "Don't you touch him," she cried, her voice breaking through the uproar. Several guests surged forward instinctively, creating a human wall around the bride and groom. Hands locked together, shoulders pressed tight, they formed a barrier of love and defiance, refusing to let hate win. Phones recorded everything, the tension, the screams, the officers clashing with guests who stood their ground. Bradley shouted into his radio, "We've got hostiles. Send more units." His words cut through Jasmine like ice. Hostiles, her family, her future wedding being labeled as a threat. No, not today. Her voice rose above the chaos, shaking but fierce. "This is our day. You will not take it from us. The world will see what you're doing, and the truth will speak louder than your lies." Even the officers frowned for a moment, startled by her raw conviction. Cameras zoomed in on her face, on the tears in her eyes, on the fire in her voice. Bradley's chest heaved with rage, but in that pulse, in that silence heavy with defiance, Jasmine realized something powerful. The more they resisted, the more the truth spread. And truth was on her side. The night was heavy, thick like syrup. The wind battered against the windows, and every strike echoed in Elizabeth's heart with dread. She sat her day at the edge of the bed, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. John paced the room, checking locks and bolts again and again, as if that could be enough to shield them from the evil that had settled next door. "We can't live like this forever," she finally whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with determination. "I will not turn our home into a prison, just because someone decided I have no right to love." John stopped, turned toward her, and let his shoulders slump. He looked as if he were aging before her very eyes, not from years, but from exhaustion, from the crushing weight of another man's hatred. "I know," he said, "but if you'd seen the way he looked at us today, those eyes, they promised more than words, they promised action." Elizabeth rose and walked to him. She placed her palm against his chest, right over the heart that pounded furiously. "Then let him know one thing," she said softly but firmly. "We will not back down." The next morning, their fears became reality. The front door was smeared with black paint, crude words, slurs, threats. Elizabeth frowned when she saw it, her heart seeming to stop for a moment. John rushed forward, scrubbing at the paint, but the letters had sunk deep into the wood, like poison. "He's crossed the line," John growled through clenched teeth. "This isn't just words anymore. This is an attack." Elizabeth turned her gaze toward the neighbor's yard and met his eyes. He stood there openly, a cigarette dangling from his lips, a vile smirk edged across his face. He seemed to savor their helplessness. Later that day, they went to the station, but instead of sympathy or support, they were met with indifferent stares and lazy words. "Well," the officers drawled, never looking up from his papers, "maybe some kids were just fooling around. You know how teenagers can be." "Teenagers," John exploded. "He stands there every day, staring at us. He threatens us to our faces. Do you want us to just wait until his voice broke. Elizabeth leaned forward, her voice cold as steel. "We will not leave until you take our report." The station fell into silence. The officers reluctantly lifted his head, met her unyielding gaze, and quickly looked away. A flicker of irritation crossed his face, but he picked up his pen and began filling out the forms. When they returned home, they were shaken, but not defeated. John sat her day on the porch in silence, sending the wooden boards, trying to erase the vile words. Elizabeth sat her day beside him, her fingers gently resting over his hand. "He thinks he can divide us," she whispered, "but everything he does only binds us closer." John looked at her, and for the first time in days, a spark of hope flickered in his eyes. "Then we endure, for us, for the future." That night, Elizabeth lay awake again, but this time, her heart beat not only with fear. Inside it lived a fierce resolve. She knew the struggle was only beginning. Rumors spread faster than the wind. It seemed the whole town now lived only by their wedding. And not with joy, as one might hope, but with sharp, stinging malice. Sarah walked down the main street, carrying a bag of groceries, and she felt the stares. The very stares that made her skin burn as if under a cruel sun. "That's the girl who married a white man," one woman whispered to another. "Her poor mother must cry herself to sleep every night," another voice chimed in. Sarah pretended not to hear, but her heart pounded in her temples so loudly, it threatened to betray every emotion. She clutched the bag tightly to her chest and quickened her pace. That evening at home, James noticed her trembling hands. "What happened?" he asked softly, handing her a cup of tea. Sarah sat there beside him and buried her face in his shoulder. "They look at me, James, as if I'm not human, as if I'm filth." He took her hand firmly. "You're my wife, and that's all that matters. They can stare, they can whisper, they can spit at our backs, but they'll never take our love." The next day, things escalated. James stepped into the hardware store, only to hear behind him, "Hey, traitor." The man's voice cracked like a whip. James turned and 3 men stood at the doorway. Their faces were familiar. "Neighbors, you've disgraced our whole neighborhood," one of them said, stepping closer. "A white man with her," another spat. "It's a shame." The store went silent, even the clerk frowned. James drew a slow, steady breath. "I've betrayed no one," he said, forcing his voice to remain calm though a storm raged inside. "I married the woman I love." One of the men leaned in close, hissing, "This isn't over, boy. We'll show you how your love will turn into a curse." James felt his fists tighten. But then Sarah's face flashed in his mind. Her eyes full of fear. No, he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "Try me," he said quietly. "But know this, I won't back down." That evening, he came home with a heavy heart. Sarah noticed at once. Was it them again? Her voice trembled. He nodded. But Sarah, James cupped her face in his hands. "No hatred will ever destroy what we built." She nodded through her tears. And deep down, she knew greater trials still lay ahead. Morning in the small town was unusually quiet. Even the birds seemed to sing more cautiously. On the square in front of the courthouse, a crowd was already gathering. People hadn't come just to watch. Everyone felt that today was about more than a private quarrel between neighbors. Today, truth itself was on trial. Amelia stood before the mirror in her hotel room. She wore a simple dress, yet it seemed to shine with purity. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded so loudly it felt as though it could be heard through the door. She glanced at James was fixing his tie, but his eyes held the same unease. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. James drew a deep breath and nodded. "Ready, but more than anything, I fear justice will once again turn its back on us." His words lingered in the air like a shadow. The courtroom was stifling. Every bench was filled. Some had come to support Amelia and James, others to mock, and many out of mere curiosity. In the front row Saturday Mr. Harper, the neighbor who had started it all. His face was stretched into a cold smile. The judge, a stern man with graying hair, entered, and the room rose to its feet. Silence fell like a heavy shroud. First, Harper's lawyer spoke. He painted James as aggressive, dangerous. He portrayed Amelia as a naive victim led astray by bad influence. His words venomously slid into the ears of the listeners, planting seeds of doubt. Amelia clenched her hands so tightly that her nails left marks in her palms. "My client, Mr. Harper," the lawyer declared, "bears no personal grudge. He only sought to protect the peace of his neighbors and the order of our town. Is that truly a crime?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned. When it was James and Amelia's lawyer's turn, the courtroom grew tense and still. "My clients," he began, "are not simply victims of a neighborly dispute. They are victims of hate, victims of prejudice we too often hide behind polished words." Amelia felt tears sting her eyes. Every word rang true, but could truth prevail? Witnesses were called. Some swore they saw James only protecting his wife. Others, swayed by Harper, spoke of hostility and threats. The room grew hotter. People whispered, argued, even voiced outrage aloud. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, but tempers refused to cool. Then Amelia was called to the stand. She rose, her footsteps echoing through the chamber. Her voice trembled, but she knew this moment would decide their future. "I love James," she said, and the room fell silent. "Everything he did for me, not for conflict, not for malice, but to protect his wife." She told them how Harper had insulted her, how his words cut deeper than blows. She held no weapon in her hands, but her voice became one, and it struck straight into the hearts of those who listened. When she finished, silence once again filled the room. The judge studied both sides intently. In his eyes flickered heavy doubt. "The decision will be announced tomorrow," he said. "Court is adjourned." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Some shouted in anger. Others laughed in silence, uncertain what to feel. Amelia and James walked out hand in hand. They knew ahead lay a night filled with fear and hope. And deep within the courtroom, Harper watched them leave. Hatred burned in his eyes. He was not ready to surrender. The courtroom smelled of old wood and dust. Heavy curtains blocked most of the sunlight, letting only thin golden streaks fall across the polished benches. Outside, dozens of people gathered on the courthouse steps, their voices echoing through the thick walls like distant thunder. Inside, Maya sat her day rigidly on the bench beside her attorney, hands clenched in her lap. She could feel her heart hammering, every beat echoing in her ears. Ethan sat her day close, his arm brushing hers, whispering, "We'll get through this, no matter what." Across the aisle, Mr. Grayson, the neighbor who had started it all, leaned back smugly in his chair, flanked by his lawyer. He looked at Maya with that same cold smirk, the one that had haunted her dreams. The judge entered, the entire room rose, and then it began. The prosecutor painted Maya as the aggressor, twisting the night's events into something unrecognizable. She escalated the conflict. She threatened a respected neighbor. She disrupted the peace of her community. Every word made Maya's stomach twist tighter. She wanted to stand up and scream the truth, but she could only grip the bench until her knuckles turned white. Then her attorney stood, calm, collected, but with fire in his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard one side. Now let me tell you about Maya Johnson, a woman who works tirelessly in her community, a woman who wanted nothing more than to live peacefully with her husband, and a woman who was harassed, humiliated, and threatened by the very man who sits across this courtroom." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some nodded, others frowned. The tension was unbearable. Then came Maya's turn to testify. Her lawyer gave her an encouraging nod, and slowly, she rose to her feet. Her legs felt like stone, her chest so tight she could barely breathe. The bailiff swore her in, and then silence. The entire room waited. Maya swallowed hard and began. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, strength grew. She told them about the nights Grayson shouted through their windows, about the slurs, about the fear of stepping outside her own home. She spoke about love, how Ethan had stood by her, how their marriage wasn't a threat, but a bond stronger than hate. Her words cut through the air like glass. Some jurors leaned forward, others wiped their eyes. Even the judge's stern face softened. When she finished, the silence was so deep she could hear her own heartbeat. And keen applause. Not from the jury, not from the lawyers, but from the people outside. Through the walls came a roar of clapping and cheering, voices chanting her name. The judge banged the gavel. "Order, order." But the message was clear. The town had spoken. And for the first time in weeks, Maya felt something stir deep inside. Her hope. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and tension. Every bench was filled. People pressed shoulder to shoulder, whispering, craning their necks toward the front where the judge's bench loomed like a mountain. Amara Saturday on the left side of the aisle, clutching Elijah's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her mother Saturday beside her, silent but trembling, while Marcus fidgeted on the other side, his anger barely contained. Across the aisle Saturday Mr. Dalton, smug in his crisp suit, his attorney whispering in his ear as if victory was already theirs. The judge entered, his gavel echoing through the chamber. "All rise." The crowd stood, the rustle of clothing blending with the heavy silence of anticipation. When the judge Saturday, the trial began. The prosecutor laid out the charges against Dalton: harassment, false accusations, assault. He spoke firmly, presenting the evidence. Security footage from the police station, photographs of Amara's bruises, testimonies from neighbors who had heard Dalton's runs late into the night. Each piece landed like a hammer, and Amara could feel the room sway in her favor. But Dalton's lawyer was skilled. He painted a picture of a misunderstood man, a killer of the community who had only been concerned about the neighborhood. He twisted words, implied Amara had provoked him, and hinted that the town's sudden sympathy for her was nothing more than pity. Elijah's jaw tightened, his hand squeezing hers. She could hear the blood rushing in her ears, every accusation like a dagger aimed at her dignity. When Amara was called to the stand, the courtroom seemed to tilt. She rose slowly, her legs heavy, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst through her dress. She raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat her down. The wooden chair was cold beneath her, grounding her just enough to stop her from shaking. "Miss Johnson," the prosecutor began softly, "can you tell the court what happened the night Mr. Dalton confronted you and your husband outside your home. Her lips trembled, but she spoke. She described the shouting, the threats, the way Dalton's spit had hit her cheek as he screamed. She spoke of the fear in Elijah's eyes, the helplessness she had felt, the ache of humiliation that still lingered. Every word was like ripping open a wound, but it was also cleansing, a truth poured into the open air. Dalton's lawyer rose with the cross-examination. He circled her like a predator. Isn't it true, Miss Johnson, that you had a history of, shall we say, drawing attention to yourself in the community? That perhaps Mr. Dalton was merely reacting to behavior that you knowingly provoked? The words hit her like poison. Amara clenched her fists. No, she said firmly, her voice cracking but strong. I did not provoke him. I lived my life. I married the man I loved. That was my only offense. Whispers rippled across the courtroom. The lawyer smirked, but Amara saw a flicker of something in the jurors' faces, doubt in his words, sympathy in their eyes. She stepped down, her legs weak, but when Elijah rose to testify, she felt stronger. His words were steady, his love for her plain, his account unwavering. By the end of the day, the divide in the courtroom was clear. Half the room leaning toward Dalton, bound by old prejudices and comfort in the familiar, the other half stirred by the courage of Amara's truth. The judge called recess, gavelled down, voices rose. As Amara walked out of the courtroom, Elijah's hand wrapped firmly around hers. She whispered to herself, "This isn't just about us anymore." And deep down, she knew she was right. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries, a sharp contrast to the tension that hung in the air. When Maya and Daniel walked in together, eyes followed them immediately, as if their presence was an announcement, an intrusion into a space that was never meant to be shared. An elderly man coughed deliberately, muttering under his breath. A young couple near the window frowned mid-conversation, and then like a knife cutting through the silence came the sound of a glass shattering on the tiled floor. "Guess we don't serve everyone here," the cashier said, his tone dripping with sarcasm as he looked straight at Maya. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to shout, to demand respect, but Maya placed a trembling hand on his arm. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced wildly. "We came here for coffee," she said softly. "That's all." The cashier smirked, leaning closer over the counter. "Then maybe you should take your kind somewhere else." The room seemed to shrink. The murmur of voices rose like a low storm. Someone snickered, another whispered. Maya could feel every set of eyes burning into her back. She thought of her grandmother's words, "Stand tall, even when the ground beneath you shakes." So she did. She lifted her chin and met the cashier's gaze. "My money spends the same as anyone else's," she said firmly. Daniel added, his voice sharp as steel, "And if you refuse service, you'll be answering not just to me, but to the law." For a moment, silence. The only sound was the dripping of spilled coffee, pooling across the counter from the broken glass. Then, someone in the back spoke up. "Leave them alone. Let them be." Another voice followed, louder this time. "Yeah, this isn't right." The murmurs shifted, no longer whispers of ridicule, but of support. The tide was turning. The cashier's smirk faltered. His eyes darted nervously across the room. The weight of the crowd's gaze had shifted, and now it pressed on him, reluctantly. He reached for a new cup. "Fire," he muttered, "coffee on the house." But the damage was already done. Maya's hands trembled as she wrapped them around the warm cup. She wasn't sure if the heat came from the coffee or the humiliation burning inside her chest. As they walked out of the cafe, Daniel whispered, "You don't deserve this." Maya blinked back tears, her voice almost breaking. "No one does." And in that fragile silence, their resolve hardened. The fight was no longer just about love, it was about dignity, about justice, about proving that their existence together was not a crime, but a statement. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, stretching shadows across the street. Yet despite the weight of what had just happened, Maya felt a small flicker of strength ignite inside her. The world could try to break her, but she would not shatter like glass. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and dust, a strange mixture of history and judgment lingering in the air. Evelyn sat her day at the long bench beside Marcus, her hands trembling as she clutched his arm. Across the aisle, Henry leaned back confidently, his lawyer whispering in his ear, his smirk widening whenever his gaze landed on her. The judge entered, his robe flowing, his gavel striking the desk with a sharp crack that silenced the murmur of the room. "All rise." Everyone stood, though Evelyn felt her knees weaken. She had imagined this moment so many times, justice finally being served, but now that it was here, fear crept up her spine. What if the town sided with Henry? What if truth was buried beneath his influence? The first witnesses were called. Neighbors spoke of the shouting matches, of Henry's constant complaints, of the venom in his words. Some voices shook with hesitation, others with anger. Yet a few people Evelyn once called friends spoke half-truths, their eyes darting away as they downplayed Henry's behavior. Each life felt like a dagger. Marcus leaned close and whispered, "Stay strong, they'll see the truth." She nodded, but her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Then came Evelyn's turn to testify. Her steps toward the stand felt like walking through fire. She swore the oath, her voice catching slightly. "Tell us," the lawyer prompted gently, "what life has been like since Henry moved next door." Evelyn swallowed, her eyes glancing at the rows of faces watching her. "It has been a war," she whispered at first, then louder, firmer. "A war I never wanted. A war brought into my home, into my marriage, into my peace. Henry harassed us. He insulted me, threatened me, even tried to destroy the only love I have." Her words cracked, but she didn't stop. When she finally sat her day down, the room was quiet. Henry's lawyer rose, his tone sharp, his questions cutting. He twisted her words, tried to paint her as emotional, unstable, exaggerating. Evelyn clenched her fists. For every accusation, she forced herself to answer calmly, though tears threatened to spill. Marcus's turn followed. He spoke with dignity, his voice steady, describing nights filled with slurs shouted through their walls, the vandalism of their yard, the fear that seeped into their marriage. Henry rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath, but Marcus never faltered. By the end of the day, the courtroom felt split into those who saw Evelyn and Marcus as victims fighting for dignity, and those who clung stubbornly to Henry's charm and lies. When the judge finally adjourned for the evening, Evelyn's chest felt heavy. The battle wasn't won yet, the gavel had fallen, but the war for truth was still raging. Outside, as they stepped into the evening air, Marcus wrapped his arm around her. "We'll keep fighting," he whispered, "together." And for the first time that day, Evelyn allowed herself to believe him. The courthouse smelled of old wood and dust, a scent that clung to every corner like a reminder of years of whispered verdicts and unspoken bias. As we stepped through the heavy double doors, the sound of murmurs rolled over us like a wave. The town had come to watch, not to seek truth, not to hope for healing, but to witness a spectacle. Evelyn squeezed my hand, her fingers trembling despite the brave face she wore. Her eyes flickered around the room, catching stares that pierced like knives. Some faces looked on with quiet sympathy, but most carried the weight of suspicion, disdain, or outright hatred. The judge sat high above us, his gavel resting lazily on the desk. His eyes were tired, almost indifferent, but I wondered, was it fatigue from years of work, or the unwillingness to confront a truth that would divide the very soil of this town? Our lawyer, a wiry man with steel gray hair, leaned toward us. "They'll try to rattle you," he whispered, voice low and urgent. "Stay calm, stay steady. The truth is on your side. Let it speak louder than their hatred." The prosecution rose first. Mr. Hartley, the same man who had once smiled at Evelyn's parents, offering help when their roof caved in after a storm. Now his voice cut like ice, accusing, twisting, painting us as intruders, as agitators, as something less than human. "They flaunted themselves," he thundered, pointing in our direction. "They knew what this community stood for, yet they disrespected our traditions, our values, and now, look where we are torn apart." Evelyn's head bowed, her shoulders tense. I wanted to reach for her, to shield her from the venom dripping from his words, but I couldn't move. The room felt like it had chained me down. Then came the witnesses. First, neighbors who spoke in carefully chosen words, their voices heavy with judgment. They didn't say racist. They didn't say hate. Instead, they wrapped their prejudice in prettier paper, concern for the community, upholding tradition, protecting values. Each phrase was a dagger. But then a surprise. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who had once left pies on her porch for any child who passed by, stood up. Her voice was shaky, but her words steady. "They are not the problem," she said, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. "The problem is the hate you're too afraid to name. These two only want what we all claim to want: love, family, peace." The room stirred. Whispers, asks. Some shook their heads violently, others lowered their eyes in shame. The judge called for order, his gavel cracking against the desk, but the echo of her words lingered, refusing to be silenced. As the day wore on, my chest felt heavier, my throat raw from swallowing back every retort, every plea. By the time we were dismissed for the evening, I could barely stand. Evelyn clung to me, her body trembling, her breath shallow. Outside, the sky was painted in streaks of crimson and gold, but to us it felt like a battlefield painted over with beauty. "Do you think they'll hear us?" she asked softly, her voice breaking. I looked at her, at the strength she carried despite the cracks in her heart. "They will," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it, because justice can't stay buried forever. But as I spoke, across the street, I saw the sheriff leaning against his car, arms folded, eyes fixed on us like we were already guilty. And in that moment, I knew tomorrow's battle would be even harder. The morning sun painted the small town in pale gold, but for Emma, the brightness felt hollow, almost mocking. She walked to the bakery, forcing a polite smile at Mrs. Green, who waved from behind the counter, but inside, her chest was heavy with fear. The council's threats lingered in her mind, like a storm cloud ready to burst. "Keep quiet, girl, or you'll regret it." The words replayed endlessly, turning sleep into restless shadows and daylight into suspicion. As she carried a bag of bread home, Emma noticed something unusual. Mr. Carter, the quiet old man who lived by the church, standing near the corner, his cane tapping nervously against the pavement. His eyes followed her, not with malice, but with intent. When their gazes met, he gave the smallest nod, as though he knew. Emma frowned, her breath catching. Could it be? Had he seen what happened that night in the alley? The thought raced through her like fire. If there was another witness, someone beating her and the boys, then the council's threats would not silence the truth forever. She crossed the street, heart pounding, and approached him. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said softly, her voice trembling. The old man looked at her, his expression weathered, yet kind. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "I've lived in this town 70 years, he whispered. I've seen men like them rise and fall. You're not alone, Emma." Her hands tightened around the bag of bread, tears threatened her eyes. "You saw?" Mr. Carter nodded once. His face was pale but steady. "I saw everything." The words hit her like a surge of air after drowning. Relief, terror, and hope collided within her. But before she could speak again, a shadow moved across the street. Two councilmen watched from the distance, their eyes sharp, their postures stiff with suspicion. Mr. Carter placed a trembling hand over Emma's. "Not here," he said quietly. "Not now, but when the time comes, I'll stand with you." Emma swallowed hard, her chest tightening with a fragile, desperate hope. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't carrying the burden alone. Yet she knew, deep down, that this revelation put them both in greater danger. And that danger was already closing in. That night, the town seemed quieter than usual. The cicadas hummed in the distance, but the streets lay empty, as though the whole place held its breath. Emma's Saturday by her window, the bread from earlier still untouched on the table. Her mind raced with Mr. Carter's words. "I saw everything." Those 3 words pulsed in her chest like a heartbeat. Relief mingled with dread. If he truly was willing to stand with her, then maybe the truth had a chance. But she also knew what it meant to have painted a target on himself as well. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees. Emma leaned closer to the glass, and that's when she noticed evil figures moving at the edge of the street. Dark coats, familiar silhouettes, councilmen. Her stomach dropped. They weren't walking, they were waiting, watching. Emma pulled the curtain shut, pressing her back against the wall. A shiver ran through her body. They knew. They must have seen her talking to Carter. Fear clawed at her throat. She wanted to run to his house, to warn him, but the council's men would be expecting it. Every move felt like a trap. Suddenly, a knock echoed at her door. Sharp, urgent. Emma's breath caught. For a moment, she didn't dare move. Then the knock came again. She crept toward the door, her heart hammering. Slowly, she opened it just a crack. Mr. Carter stood there, his cane trembling in his hand, sweat on his brow. Emma, his voice was low, broken by heavy breathing. They came to my house. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes darting through the shadows. They know I saw. They told me to keep my mouth shut, or else. Emma gripped the door frame, her knees weak. You can't stay there tonight, she whispered. Come in, please. For a moment, he hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then he nodded and stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed felt heavy, like a storm pressing down on them both. Two people now carried the truth, and the council would stop at nothing to silence them. The night stretched on, thick and restless, as though the town itself couldn't sleep. Inside Emma's small home, the oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. She sat her day across from Mr. Carter at the worn wooden table, her hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of tea she hadn't even touched. Mr. Carter's breathing was uneven. He had walked fast, maybe even run before reaching her door, and at his age, that alone was dangerous. His cane rested against the wall, forgotten, while his trembling hands rubbed at his temples. Emma studied him closely. The man who had always carried himself with quiet dignity now looked frail, haunted, and yet beneath the fear in his eyes, there was still a fire that refused to be put out. Tell me exactly what happened, she said finally, her voice low, steadying itself against the silence. He swallowed hard, then looked up at her. It was after sundown. I was sitting in my chair when I heard them outside, 3 of them. They didn't bother knocking, just walked straight into my home like they owned it. His voice cracked, but he pressed on, one of them leaned down close, so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath, and he said, "You didn't see a thing, old man. If you open your mouth, you'll wish you hadn't." Emma's hands tightened around the mug, her pulse hammered in her ears. "They wanted to scare you. They did more than that," Carter whispered, his gaze falling to the table. "They left a mark on my door, a cross carved into the wood, a warning. Everyone in this town knows what that means." Emma felt her chest tighten. The council wasn't just intimidating him, they were branding him, marking him as a traitor in his own community. For a long while, the only sound was the crackle of the lamp. Finally, Emma leaned forward, her voice urgent. "You can't go back there. If you stay in that house, they'll come again, and next time, they won't just leave threats." His eyes lifted to hers, tired yet sharp. "So what would you have me do, Emma?" "Hannah, well, that's not who I am." She felt a sting in her chest at his words. He reminded her of her father, proud, stubborn, unwilling to bow even in the face of cruelty. "I don't want you to run," she said softly, "but we need to be smart. If we're the only ones who know the truth, we'll be crushed under it. We need more voices, more witnesses." Carter let out a bitter laugh. "Witnesses? This whole town saw, Emma. They just pretend they didn't. They whisper about it in the corners of their kitchens, in the pews at church, but when it comes to speaking out, their tongues turn to stone. Fear has made them silent." Emma's throat tightened. She knew he was right. People wanted to live their quiet lives, to keep their heads down and avoid trouble, but she also knew silence had a cost. Her gaze drifted to the window, where the curtains still hung heavy against the night. "Then maybe it's not just about asking," she murmured. "Maybe it's about forcing the truth into the open, about showing them that hiding won't protect them forever." Mr. Carter studied her, his brows furrowed. For the first time, a flicker of something hope, perhaps best through his eyes. You sound like someone preparing for a fight. Emma looked down at her hands, realizing how tightly she had been gripping the mug. She set it aside, her fingers stiff. Maybe I am, because if we don't fight, then what happened to Daniel will happen again, and no one will ever stop them. The room seemed to grow colder at the mention of his name. Daniel, his laughter, his kindness, his voice seal of it snuffed out in a single night. Emma forced herself not to cry, though her throat ached with the effort. Mr. Carter reached across the table, his hand trembling as it rested lightly over hers. Then I'll stand with you. For him. Her eyes burned, but she nodded. For him. A sound outside made them both freeze. The creak of a wagon wheel, the crunch of boots against dirt, voices slow, muffled, moving too slowly to be casual. Emma extinguished the lamp with a quick motion, plunging the room into darkness. Her heart pounded as she and Carter sat there in silence, the air so tense it felt like it might shatter. Through the thin walls of the house, she heard Ida whisper carried on the night. She knows something. Emma's breath caught. The council's men weren't just warning Carter anymore. They were coming for her. The night pressed down over the town like a suffocating blanket, heavy and still. Only the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic broke the silence. Jack Saturday on his porch, the same spot where so much had started. His gaze was fixed on the streetlights that flickered weakly, as if even they were weary of illuminating a world that seemed so full of injustice. His thoughts churned. The trial was closing in. The boys' families whispering promises of leniency and backroom deals. Jack had seen it before, the way powerful hands tried to bend the law. His heart ached at the thought of those young men walking free after everything they had done. Martha's words still echoed in his mind. Justice isn't always found in a courtroom. He clenched his jaw, wrestling with the storm inside him. Should he trust the system, flawed as it was, or should he take matters into his own hands, deliver the justice that so many times had slipped through the cracks? The porch creaked as heavy footsteps approached. It was his grandson, Michael, tall and broad, still wearing his military jacket. He carried himself like a man who had seen too much, yet his eyes softened when they met Jack's. "Grandpa," Michael said quietly, lowering himself onto the step beside him. "I know what you're thinking, but you don't have to carry this alone." Jack let out a bitter laugh, rough and tired. "Don't I? These boys, they think they can do whatever they want, and the town, half of them already want to forgive and forget." His voice cracked, the anger mingling with despair. What happens when forgiveness becomes permission? Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've fought men who thought the same way, men who believed rules were only for the weak. I wanted to take justice into my own hands more times than I can count. But that path, Grandpa," he paused, his voice heavy with experience, "it changes you, and not in ways you can come back from." Jack stared at him, feeling the weight of his grandson's words, but deep inside, a fire still burned, stubborn and unyielding. "And what if I can't just sit here? What if I can't watch them walk free, while I'm left with scars no one can see?" Michael turned his head, his jaw tightening. "Then we make sure they don't walk free, but we do it the right way. We dig, we find every truth, every detail they've tried to bury. We don't let them slip away, not this time." The old man's eyes glistened under the dim porch light. For the first time in a long while, he felt less alone. The battle wasn't just his anymore. His grandson wasn't asking him to let go of justice. He was asking him to fight smarter, not darker. Jack exhaled slowly, the rage inside him shifting into something else, a resolve that was sharper, steadier. He turned to Michael, his voice low but firm. Then we fight together. No shadows, no shortcuts. If justice is out there, we'll drag it into the light. The night seemed to breathe again, the silence not quite as heavy. In the shadows of that porch, a choice had been made, not just between vengeance and forgiveness, but between carrying the burden alone or sharing it with someone strong enough to bear it too. Jack rose to his feet, his cane steady beneath him. His grandson followed, towering but silent. Together they stood against the darkness, 2 generations bound by blood and the same unyielding demand that justice, however long it took, would not be denied. The morning sun broke slowly over the horizon, casting golden light across the town that had seemed so dark and unyielding only hours before. The courthouse steps were crowded with townsfolk, some eager, some hesitant, all waiting for the final reckoning. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Every wooden bench creaked under the weight of people holding their breath. Emma and Mr. Carter sat side by side, hands intertwined, while Michael and Jack remained near the doorway, eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. The judge entered, his robe flowing, gavel in hand. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. He banged the gavel once, then again, calling the courtroom to order. Today, he began, voice echoing off the walls, we reach a conclusion, not just for the individuals involved, but for the community that has watched and waited. Justice will be served. Emma felt her chest tighten. Months of fear, uncertainty, and struggle had led to this moment. She glanced at Mr. Carter, whose calm yet resolute gaze reminded her that truth had allies, even in the darkest times. The prosecutor presented the final evidence, photographs, testimonies, and Mr. Carter's account, all pieces of a puzzle that had once seemed impossible to complete. One by one, the witnesses confirmed the facts, the town's complicity, and the lies that had tried to bury the truth. Henry's face, usually so smug and untouchable, grew pale. His lawyer fumbled with papers, his arguments twisting into desperation. The courtroom seemed to lean closer, listening to the unraveling of a man who had believed himself untouchable. Then the jury fell back, their faces solemn. The foreman stood and cleared his throat. "We, the jury, find the defendants guilty on all counts," he said. The room erupted with chaos, but with relief. Some wept quietly, others smiled with a weight lifted from their shoulders. Emma's hands trembled as tears streamed down her face. Justice had come, slow but unyielding, like dawn breaking over the night. Outside, the townsfolk who had gathered on the steps cheered, some clapping, others embracing. The long months of fear, doubt, and intimidation had finally yielded to truth. Michael put a hand on Jack's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the battle they had fought together, not just against the council's corruption, but against the darkness within their own hearts' temptation to take justice into their own hands. Emma stepped onto the courthouse steps, feeling the sunlight warm her face. Mr. Carter joined her, leaning heavily on his cane but standing proud. "We did it," she whispered, almost to herself. Carter nodded. We let the truth do the work. That's stronger than fear, stronger than lies. In the distance, Henry and his accomplices were led away, their faces pale and empty of the arrogance they once were like armor. The town had witnessed the fall of those who believed they were above the law. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the tension leave her body for the first time in months. Around her, the community began to stir up, perfectly healed, not free from prejudice, but changed. The truth had forced them to confront themselves, to recognize courage, and to see justice realized. Jack stepped beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. It's over, he said. Emma smiled through tears, nodding. No, it's just beginning. The beginning of a town that remembers what fairness feels like. The beginning of hope. And as the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light over streets that had once been shadowed by fear, Emma, Jack, Michael, and Mr. Carter knew the same thing. They had endured the darkness, faced every threat, and emerged into the light. Justice was not just a verdict in a courtroom. Justice was the courage to stand, the choice to speak, and the strength to let the truth shine even when the world seemed intent on hiding it. The town would never forget this day, and neither would they.